All right, welcome to Halitics on Tuesday. Hope you had a nice Juneteenth yesterday. I most certainly did. Got my car windshield replaced, and I was very, very, very pleased to learn that it was covered by my insurance policy. I was concerned it wasn't, but it was, so I'm really happy. And give me 1 second. I got to just close this door. I forgot my son, or I'm going to ask my son. He can hear me right now. He can close it very gently and will not slam it, is what he will now do. Let's see if he can follow that direction. Apparently not. I'll have to do it myself. Here we go. All right. Thank you so much. And I do apologize to my son for waking him. It's the first day where school is over, because he's a teacher. He's a para-educator, teaches, as does my wife. She has a final day. He was off, yesterday was, the holiday, so I was being more careful, but I forgot. I just have been doing the program now for several months, and there's never been anyone home when I've been live, and now there is. Now I'm going to have to get accustomed to this new normal. At least for the next few weeks. All right, Hal Ginsberg, Halitics. Click like, please, and click subscribe. As I mentioned yesterday, we're over 100 subscribers. The goal is 1,000, and then we'll set another goal. That's ambitious. I get it. It's ambitious. But we went from, 0 to 10 to 10 to 100, so another 10 times tenfold would be 1,000. Probably be a little tougher, but you can help me get there. I hope you will. And again, I think what I provide, what other hosts don't, a couple of things. One, again, there's no third rails. I don't think there's any other host out there who will talk about anything, isn't afraid. In fact, I think kind of welcomes offending viewers, which probably is a big problem for me. That hurts me. I don't really fall into any neat ideological category. I'm certainly very far to the left, progressive, wise, but I focus more than some hosts, certainly on economic justice and certainly the environment. And I'm not I'm not reluctant to criticize identity politics and even sometimes identity groups when I feel that they're putting what they perceive to be their own group interest ahead of everything else. I don't like that. I think we're all in the same boat. We're all on the same planet. We need to work together to solve the existential crises which we face. That's what Halitics is all about. I welcome your calls when I'm live, 240-363-7190. I hope you'll join me. My latest kick, and I think I'm going to stick with it, has been supporting Dr. Cornel West for president at this time. I think we need to unify around his candidacy. We need to coalesce in support of the one demonstrated progressive, and that is, of course, Dr. West. In my opinion, I think it's pretty clear cut. I think it's pretty inarguable, frankly. So I hope you'll join me. That's what we're about right now. If you disagree, please call in 240-363-7190. The image you see on your screen, though, is not of Dr. West. It is of a polar bear on a melting ice shelf or iceberg. And we know the polar bears are at risk because they can't hunt like they used to with melting Arctic seas. The areas where their principal food prey, I think they're the sea otters, I believe, can now pop up pretty much anywhere. The sea otters used to have to find little holes in the ice because it would be thick, and especially as winter would come on, and also when they were fishing, when the otters were out fishing, they'd have to come up into these little holes, and the polar bears would be waiting for them. Now, of course, there are not little holes. You can see there are rivers of water and ever-shrinking ice. So the poor polar bears are skinny, and they're having trouble finding food, and they're dying off, and it's terrible. So this article was published on 13/01/2022, so that would be, if I do my math right, what's the 13th month? No, I'm being funny here. It's the 13th day of the first month. This would be the European the European Dating Convention. So January 13, 2022, a little over a year ago, the planet is surpassing dangerous new heat records. 2021 was one of the hottest years ever. I think you can read that while the global ocean heated up to frightening levels. That's over a year ago. I mean, it's not that long ago, right? So, I mean, it's probably pretty, what word am I going to try to use here? It's probably pretty current to say that, right? We probably aren't in much of a different place now than we were on January 13, 2022. And actually, that is not the case. Things have gotten progressively worse. So it used to be that we would talk about climate change as a function of decades, maybe even centuries, right? You'd have a cold century, maybe back in the medieval period, and then that was followed by what they called the little optimum, when it got warmer, and then things got cold and wet again, and this could be a period of centuries. Now we're seeing spikes within years, right? And we're only seeing basically hotter and hotter temperatures now. The last 8 years have been the hottest on record, and 2023, not in the books yet, obviously, but it is looking to be even worse, even more brutally hot than we've seen in ever. Okay, at least that we have seen in our recording of weather. And I often hear people say, oh, yes, but we've only been recording with really reliable data for 150, 160, 170 years, maybe since just around the Civil War, when data really began to become regularized, scientifically maintained. The problem with that argument is that even if we only had 153 years of consistently reliable records, you still wouldn't have 9 straight years of the hottest weather ever unless there was something going on that was causing it. And what is it? We know what that is. It's the human cause, the anthropogenic climate cataclysm, the catastrophe. And you can see this is from WGN. Global ocean, this is yesterday, or 2 days ago, I'm sorry. 2 days ago, global oceans are so hot right now. This is over a year, just less than 2 years, a year and a half after we have the report, of course, that those poor polar bears can barely find otters to eat. Temperatures in the waters have never been as high as they were last January that we know, at least going back millions of years. And yes, they were hotter millions of years ago. Yes, they were. But now global oceans are so hot right now that scientists can't even figure out what's causing it. It's almost statistically impossible, or I would go so far as to say it is statistically impossible to imagine we would have these ever-rising temperatures without, and I like the way WGN9 there uses, and I think they're relying on data provided by CNN. Now, some of you would say, well, if it's CNN, we can't trust it. And we'll get into that, because that is a sort of, let me say this, you can trust it, but it's understandable that people would be skeptical of anything coming from CNN. In this case, your skepticism is unfounded. And I know that, hustlers and media demagogues will try to claim that because CNN lied about the origins of COVID, which it has, because CNN lied about the Russiagate, then they're probably lying about the climate catastrophe. Here's the responses to that real quick, and we'll get into more detail. One, CNN has a financial stake in getting you to believe that big pharma and for-profit healthcare industry is on your side. So they don't want to tell you when they're responsible for a lab leak that created COVID. They don't want you to know that, because that would impact negatively on their advertisers. So they're going to follow what their advertisers tell them, which is don't talk about the lab leak. Blame it on a wet market in Wuhan because that doesn't harm our bottom line. That's not likely to cause people to demand Medicare for all or to only vote for politicians who aren't in our pockets. So CNN does certainly have a financial stake in lying to you about the origins of COVID. CNN certainly has an interest in fomenting division within classes, right? Economic classes, to pit white and black people against each other. It's certainly in their interest because they're hand in glove with the richest and most powerful people on the planet. Their owners are incredibly rich and powerful themselves. They take money from the oil and gas industry, from big pharma, from other super rich and powerful institutions and industries. So they're perfectly happy to fan the flames of dissent and anger against Donald Trump and tell you that he's backed by the Russians. Also, if you recall, especially in 2016, Trump did talk about, and to a degree did insist on, slightly less unfair trade. He did impose tariffs on China. He did talk about cutting our defense spending. He did talk about, never of course put it and implemented it, talked about eliminating the tax breaks that hedge fund billionaires enjoy. So those were slightly frightening to the elites of both parties. So why not try to pit people against Trump and claim that he's backed by the Russians and we have definitive proof that the Russians are behind the hacking at the DNC and also were responsible for electing him in the first place. Anything's better than having the Democratic Party have to do a real postmortem and examine its own fealty to the corporate interests. So again, CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, Washington Post all have a very significant stake in attributing Trump's victory to anything but some kind of populist revolt, admittedly an authoritarian populist, but a populist revolt against the corporate and financial elites. So they're going to lie to you about Russiagate. But the media elites, if anything, have an incentive to cause you to question whether climate science is real, whether we are in fact burning our planet up. Their incentives are on the side of hiding from you the severity of the climate crisis, just like their interests are on the side of attributing Trump's win in 2016 to nefarious reasons, not to complete disgust with both parties, both of the duopoly, and just like they have an incentive to get you to believe that Big Pharma is not responsible for the COVID outbreak. So their incentive is for you not to believe in the climate catastrophe. If they tell you that the climate catastrophe is happening, it probably really is happening because they're telling you something that doesn't jibe with their own best interest. And it's also important to understand that the news of the climate catastrophe that supports the science, that demonstrates that the climate catastrophe is real, that's coming from so many different sources. It's not like it's just one or two outlets that are saying that it's real, humans are burning our planet up. It's just about everyone except maybe Fox News and some extremists on the right. And again, the information is ultimately sourced to very reliable places like NOAA, like NASA. Am I saying they're always right? No, but I'm saying that they're reliable. So right now we have ever hotter oceans. They were hotter than ever before in January of 2022, and yet now they're even hotter still. And the only reason this could be the hottest that we've ever recorded them at, 1.5 Celsius. So a Celsius degree is 5 is 9/5, almost twice as great. 1 degree Celsius is almost twice as great as 1 degree Fahrenheit. So if we have 1.5 degrees Celsius rise in ocean temperature since the industrial era began, and of course the rise is due to the industrial era because the industrial era is when we started burning coal and then later on oil and gas. We've seen our temperatures rise, at least when it comes to the ocean and over the Arctic, well over 2 degrees Fahrenheit. So from whatever you choose as your norm, 58, 60, 58, 32, 31 in the Arctic, 33 in the Arctic. From frozen ice to melted water. That's what we're doing right now. And it's only getting worse. Now, what do we have evidence? Because people say, oh, I don't know if it's really true. How do we know it's really true? You're just telling me a lot of stuff, but maybe it's BS. Well, we can look at certainly the imagery. But this is I think, a pretty cool, cool maybe is the wrong chart. Maybe that's the wrong, well, it's not cold right now, it's hot. But this chart, and again, I'm going to our friends over there at CNN, I think kind of shows the point, proves the point. I hope it does. I hope it does for me. As we've seen ever, and I know people are like, well, again, we can't trust. I don't see how this is faked. Record carbon dioxide levels. And this is from a new record high in 2023. So starting in 1980, well after we'd already observed the climate, the Earth, getting hotter and hotter, well after we see since 1980 a steady, significant increase with slight acceleration in the parts per million of carbon dioxide. Now, according to this chart, as of May 2023, we saw 424 parts per million in May. The tipping point is 350, right? There's 350.org. You may have heard of that. That came from Bill McKibben's decision, or Bill McKibben's conclusion that we were facing a tipping point at 350. 350.org. So we've blown past that. We're 20% higher than 350. 423. 70 is higher than 70 higher than 350. 73. So we're 20% higher than that tipping point. And by the way, we're not seeing that line start to drop. We're not even seeing it flatten out. Isn't that interesting? You'd think it would, right? Because we made all these strides. We're using our electric vehicles, and we've got more efficient gasoline engines powering the jets that stream across the skies, and people have more fuel efficient homes. We put rooftop gardens, and yet despite all of that, we're burning more fossil. Remember peak oil? I remember there's all this concern. I remember getting into it with people about this one. Oh no, we're running out of oil. We're at peak oil. And I was like, I wish it were true. It's not. I wish it were true, but it's not. But it would be great. Well, we're going to face all sorts of problems if we hit peak oil. I'm like, well, we're facing a bigger problem, which is the extinction of many, many, many species as a result of not being at peak oil. The solution, ultimately, I do think we have to simply slap huge taxes on gas and then and petroleum and coal, but we need to have a government that's on our side, not on the side of the oil and gas industry, and we don't have that. We simply don't. We have a government that is perfectly happy to dump billions of our tax money into subsidies for clean green energy at the same time as it's dumping those same subsidies into the oil and gas industry and green lighting, pipelines and giant ports for liquefied natural gas and blowing up pipelines, which dumps more methane into the atmosphere. That's where we are, folks. Sorry to be a Debbie Downer, but that's where we are. And if you want that to change, if you care about your children, I don't see any solution, honestly, but voting for Dr. West, voting against the Democratic and Republican duopoly. They're both responsible. We're going to play a clip from Congresswoman Tlaib about this. And she's gotten some heat because she's not ready, she's unwilling to forswear, to forsake, to reject the Democratic Party and embrace a third-party alternative like Dr. West. And I think it's fair to criticize her for that. She should be willing to do that. But I'll take the criticism of the Democratic Party. I'll take the attacks on the Democratic Party for what they're doing, even if she's not prepared yet to go to the point where she'll support a candidate outside. And by the way, you can. I think if you're a member of the Democratic Party, one of the things they tell you is you have to swear allegiance to Democratic candidates. So Tulsi in 2016 endorsed Bernie, and she could do that because Bernie was running as a Democrat. He was running for the Democratic nomination. But Tulsi could do that. She took an awful lot of heat, but she wasn't actually violating any Democratic Party rules. The unspoken rule was you can't go against the Clintons. The unspoken rule is you can't support the most progressive candidate running. And she did ultimately leave the party, but she didn't violate a specific rule. But you cannot endorse a non-Democrat running against a Democrat. So ultimately, you can't, Bernie can't, Tlaib can't, they cannot support Dr. West. I would say they should anyway. So what? Screw the Democrats. And if you really, and I saw this too, by the way, on Facebook, and just say, I've been promoting West, I've been pointing out how it's just, getting ever hotter. And somebody said, well, then definitely we should support Republicans and things will get even worse. See, to me, that's no answer. It doesn't matter. You're looking at this, you support a Democrat, you support a Republican, either way, you're supporting the oil and gas industry. You're supporting the end of our planet. You can't vote Democrat now and claim to be a climate champion. I just don't see how you can when every single Democrat voted for Hakeem Jeffries in the House. When the squad has rushed to endorse Joe Biden for re-election. I don't know how you can vote for a Democrat, at least in national elections and congressional elections, and be an ally of the planet, be opposed to the climate cataclysm. I just don't know how you can. So we saw. But I'm going to give Tlaib, but still, I'm going to give her credit. She does take on as far as she probably feels she can, and I think, hey, you're a human being. You gotta put your loyalty to the planet, to the people above your loyalty to your party. But I understand how hard that must be. So first 11 days of June. This is this year, and by the way, this video cast is called. It's not just climate burning and floods or something of that. I don't remember now what I called it. I'm sorry about that. Yes, the human ecocide where we're destroying our ecology and thereby destroying ourselves, embraces more than just the climate cataclysm and all the results from it. There's also the direct killing of animals, and there's also there's actual direct killing. So first 11 days of June saw the highest temperatures on record by a substantial margin. We are now seeing global air temperatures as well as water temperatures 1.5 degrees Celsius hotter than they were before the Industrial Revolution, and we're seeing heat records broken across the world, around the world. Canada, an unusually stifling heat wave, blanketing much of that country, and that's why we have those fires that are 15 times bigger than average. So no question, we are committing ecocide. Let's get to this video. I think it's worth it. Let's listen to, if we can, Tlaib. And I always have trouble. I don't know why this is such a challenge for me to get these videos, but let's see if I can get it to play. There's something, as much as I love my OBS studio, it is not perfect. It is simply not. And here we are starting at the beginning. You're not seeing it. I'll get to you, get it there. No, you're not even hearing it. I guess I haven't transitioned it. Let's see if we can get, there we go. Let's get well, she's not a doctor. Let's get Congresswoman Tlaib on your screen.
So I can't say this.
There we go.
It is definitely bipartisan in that regard of who is standing up for fossil fuel. They're not saying it that way. It is very clear to me, and you know, this rhetoric around the climate projects are, you know, for national security is bullshit. They aren't about energy security. You know, we're seeing the demand for fossil fuels declining now and into the future. And so these projects are about making money for a small handful of people at the cost of the entire ecosystem and communities that will be sacrificed for that greed. What you're seeing now is the fossil fuel industry and lobbyists are now going around Congress. They're still focused in Congress, but they're going around Congress and trying to look for executive action.
All right, let me stop it right there. So this is Congresswoman Tlaib, just so you know when, what, why, who. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, one of the squad members. This was a conference on Sunday evening, Father's Day, and I actually left my sons, which I feel kind of guilty about, to watch this conference on Zoom, and I actually posted a little bit too, so hopefully you'll see my post. But there's Congresswoman Tlaib, and she is saying that it's both parties who are responsible for greenlighting these horrible ecocidal projects like the Mountain Valley Pipeline, like Willow Creek. And she said they go to Congress, meaning the lobbyists, but they're trying to avoid Congress too and going to seek executive action. And who's the executive? The executive is a Democrat, is Joe Biden. So I know Tlaib is trying to also a little bit, I mean, it's all true. This is what she's saying is true. There's nothing inaccurate, but maybe she's trying to say, hey, it's not all Democrats. But again, Democrats have to be responsible for what Joe Biden is doing because they've endorsed him, because they haven't broken with him. All right, let's get back to Tlaib, and I'll also show you what how I posted in response. But what she has to say is valuable. It's true. It just, in my view, doesn't go far enough.
A dark room behind doors in the White House, drafting bills, drafting amendments, telling, hey, we can do this or that. Many of them are even trying to repeal some of the small, minute movement, which probably, you know, is just not enough for communities like mine. In the Inflation Reduction Act. And again, we have to move with the urgency. You all get it. But I just want you all to know they're going to the judiciary branch or they're going to the executive branch and going around Congress. They're going at all levels of trying to, again, push back on any sort of, you know, halt in the trillions of dollars and these billions every year towards subsidies for the fossil fuel industry and so much more. I know this. And it needs to be very clear. And I tell my residents all the time, we still have time for President Biden to reverse course. He can revoke and deny presidential permits. He can announce a ban on new fossil fuel leasing. He can say, this is it. We're going to do fossil fuel phase outs right now, starting today. And he can declare the climate emergency that we believe is very much, again, it's this. I mean, it's like, I think Adam says, you say, duh. It is very much something that I think the American people are with us on. But I think Grace Lee Boggs taught me in Detroit, and Grace Lee would sit an audience of young people like myself and say, we did not get the Civil Rights Act or organizing unions in the workplace because of who was in Congress or who was in the White House. It was because the streets demanded it. And so I'm asking all of you to know, one, I know many of you, are focused on members of Congress. That's good, but let's also focus on reforms to the Supreme Court and judicial process, and let's focus on the White House and the Biden administration on these issues.
All right, so I want to stop it right there. So I agree with her 100% on this. Well, not quite. I think there's a tendency, and it's understandable, among electeds when they don't do what we want to blame us for not pushing them to do what they're supposed to do. Now, Joe Biden got a lot of support from environmental groups. He was feted. That's why I was downtown last week. I showed you some clips of a protest by the organization that is hosting this event, which is called Climate Defiance, and which I'm part of. And we at Climate Defiance were downtown in DC at the wharf, actually, so not really downtown, but close enough, close to the White House, close to the Capitol, closer to the Capitol, actually. We were there to protest an award, an honor given to Joe Biden by the League of Conservation Voters. We're arguing, hey, how can he possibly get this award? He doesn't deserve it. He didn't do anything except make things worse. And now Tlaib is saying, well, we're not doing enough. Well, she's saying, we have to push, we have to push, we have to push. Well, I don't know what more we're supposed to do. I mean, at some point, the response is, you're not doing it, we're going to find someone else. That, to me, is the push. And that's what I wrote in the chat. I wrote, before I write a check, because there was also a fundraising opportunity for the organization, which I greatly respect and I have contributed to, and I will, again, Climate Defiance. But here I wanted to be very specific to Congresswoman Tlaib. Before I write a check, I want to know whether the Squad and progressive organizations will urge voters to abandon both parties that comprise the duopoly and to vote for Dr. West in the presidential election next year. And they won't do it. They won't do it. She didn't respond to that. It says you to Adam McKay. I also sent that to, McKay was the kind of the MC, I guess. You'd say the introducer. He introduced her. So he could ask her the question directly, or she could respond. And you could see first I wrote to McKay, but I also wrote to Tlaib. And there's just crickets. They don't answer. They don't respond. There was a video done by a Tim Pool's group where she was asked when she was at the White House last week, will you tell people not to vote for Joe Biden? And she won't do it. They won't do it. And the argument, the any blue will do argument is, well, Trump is worse. But is he worse? Biden's approved more projects than Trump. And when Biden's in office, there tends to be kind of, it was the same thing with Obama with war. There's like, oh, well, we're all good now. We've got Joe Biden in the office. Well, we're not good. We're clearly not good. Just like when Obama took office, we weren't good when it came to war. So we need to abandon the Democrats. And even Rashida Tlaib just simply isn't willing to go as far as we need her to go. Incredibly depressing, incredibly frustrating, incredibly upsetting. Call me, 240-363-7190. We need to unify. Oh, I haven't, one thing I haven't been doing, and I've got to check. Okay, so we're all right with the chat, but I never get chat except when I don't look at the chat. All right, 240-363-7190. Hope you join me right now. Let's get back to the slides. I was pleased with what Congresswoman Tlaib had to say. I thought it was very valuable. Ultimately, we need the Squad to go much, much farther than they've gone, and often they're going in the wrong direction. Here, I give her credit. All right, so I did mention, and why, what I was doing with this program is, it's not just about the climate cataclysm. That's not the only factor that's part of the anthropogenic ecocide that we're living in right now, that we're living through right now. I saw this article in the New York Times, and I'm always interested in animals. If you ever watched or listened to me when I was doing radio, I would often digress or often talk about interesting articles I had read about animals. So I was fascinated by this, how deep, and I didn't read this really with the thought it would necessarily be something I would talk about, but when I read through the article, I realized, when I started reading it, I didn't think, it'll be something I'll discuss on Halitics. Which again, click like, click subscribe, bottom right. Tell your friends, tell your enemies, post, share. I didn't think I was going to talk about this story, but I read it because I was interested in it, and I thought, well, there may be something in here I can use, because I'm always thinking about that. How deep diving sharks stay warm will take your breath away. And this is a focus on those hammerhead sharks. Very interesting shark. Its head is weirdly shaped. It really does look like a hammer. And it's got that wide head because it's got eyes on either side. Apparently, having the eyes on either side of its head gives it a really, really impressive amount of perspective. And so it can see, it knows exactly how far prey is, a fish, something that it wants to eat. It knows exactly how far away it is and how to anticipate where it will be when it arrives at the same when the fish and the shark, where they will collide, so the shark will be able to eat it. So one thing that the hammerheads do, again, because of that tremendous vision they have on either side of their very wide head, is they dive deep down, and they go where other sharks can't go, and there's less predators to compete with, so they can scoop up more fish. So they survive as they seek food deep in the darkest parts of the ocean, freezing parts of the ocean. They use what the writer here calls a trick. I don't know if I like the word trick exactly, but okay, I'll take that. It's really a trick. It's more just how they've evolved, I think, is how I would say it. And the question is that, by the way, the writer of this piece, sort of a little bit funny, is using little linguistic tricks themselves, which I think is interesting. How do these cold-blooded chondrichthyans, is that how you pronounce it, I guess, or chondrichthyans? I guess there's a little bit of alliteration there. How do these cold-blooded chondrichthyans tolerate these temperatures without turning, more alliterative, 3 T's in a row, into frozen fish? So see a little bit of humor in the writing. How do they avoid, more alliteration too? Cold-blooded chondrichthyans tolerate these temperatures without turning into frozen fish. How does that happen? They skip the frills and close their gills, essentially holding their breath. So the reason the fish, which would get very cold very quickly if that cold ocean water was to enter into their systems through their gills, you can see those slotted gills, because the cold water would actually get inside of them. So they don't. They have, their skin protects them to a significant degree, and they actually have those gills just sort of collapse over their innards, and they don't get as cold. They don't get cold. They can dive deep for several minutes. Hopefully, from their perspective, they find a big fish, and then they eat it. And then they surface, or they don't. If they don't surface, they won't surface because they don't breathe air. They breathe through the water, but they come much closer to the surface where the water is warmer, and they get comfortable again. So that's how these cold-blooded chondrichthyans, basically, the not tiger shark, the hammerhead shark does that. That's how it does it. And I thought that was interesting. And apparently they have not observed, maritime biologists have not observed this in other fish. So I thought, and I kept, I was curious, well, how are these hammerheads doing? Are they an endangered species? Because I've heard that sharks are doing many sharks are really struggling. So I was curious about that. And I read, and what really piqued my interest is because I was thinking about this the whole time, but what really piqued my interest about the hammerhead shark and specifically how it's doing was this paragraph. The biologist, the marine biologist, Dr. Royer, is next planning to study their metabolism, the shark's metabolism, to understand the recovery period. So what happens when they dive deep and they have to hold their breath, they don't get the oxygen through their gills. What happens when they get close to the surface, they warm up? Are they able to recover quickly, or do they have to take a half hour off before they go diving again? So he suspects that this burst of activity below the surface may explain another fact about the sharks. They die easily when trapped on fishing lines. So they put those deep sea lines into the ocean, and they also the commercial fisheries, right? The harvesters, they basically just harvest everything in the ocean, which there's less and less of. So they find dead hammerheads either on a line. A lot of apparently other sharks, if they're caught, they may survive depending on how long they're stuck in a net. They don't always die quickly, but the hammerheads don't do well. They're just gone because they're like cheetahs, right? Cheetahs are very delicate, they're very fast, but because they've evolved to perform this remarkable athletic feat of running faster for short periods than any other land animal, even faster than racehorses, they're delicate and they're fragile, just like greyhounds too. You see those skinny little dogs. They're not big, tough Saint Bernards or shepherds. They're fragile. They're delicate. So same with the hammerheads, at least that's what they think. And I decided to look deeper into this. Went over to the NOAA site to examine NOAA, National Oceanic, is it Administrative Agency? I'm not sure. National Oceanographic, something or other. So here is what they have to say about those sharks. And indeed, the hammerhead is not doing particularly well. Pretty much across its range, it's in danger. You can see, by the way, that picture of the hammerhead, you can see the eye on the side of the hammerhead that's closer to you. So as I mentioned, those eyes allow it to see almost 360 degrees and have tremendous perspective, so they can know exactly where their prey is relative to their position with using triangulation. Across their range, they're endangered. Eastern Pacific, Eastern Atlantic, Central and Southwest Atlantic, Indo-West Pacific. So wherever that shark is found, it's dying off. Why? Well, we just heard a very good potential reason. They're fragile, they're delicate. Humans are killing them. Just that simple. We're wiping out another species, and this is interestingly not apparently due, at least if you believe NOAA, and I certainly do. I most certainly do believe them. I don't have absolute skepticism about every organization that's related to the government just because they do lie a lot. So these very interesting, unique animals, very large, 335 pounds, 11 feet. So they're not the biggest sharks, but they're not the smallest either. They live 30 years, up to 30. What is the threat? What is causing that extinction? It's not habitat depletion. In other words, there's still enough other fish in the sea for them to eat. It's not the temperature of the ocean, because remember, they can survive in very cold. They can go deep. Unlike other sharks, these sharks can go deep. So if the water starts to get warmer at the surface, they can go deeper. And they don't need to surface because they don't breathe air. They breathe through their gills, the oxygen in the water. So what's killing the hammerhead? Bycatch, human activity. Bycatch just means like what's caught that we didn't mean to catch. If we're going fishing for tuna, oh, there's a shark in the in the net. Oh, that's too bad. Well, so be it, you know. Can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. This is what humans are doing. And it breaks my heart every time I read stuff like this, every time I learn of this. It's tragic. It's what we do. And that's why we need to support somebody who gets what the environment is what humans are putting through, or putting our mother through. What humans are doing to our only planet. Somebody who talks the talk, walks the walk. And I'm just going to keep talking about this guy. I don't know who else meets this, who else fits this description. So there's Dr. West. Guess when he was at Harvard? I know he left Harvard. He's at Princeton now. I saw him on, and I only see things, by the way, I never watch TV. I saw a YouTube video with him, and I give her credit. You know, look, you all want to hate on Fox all the time, but what's her blonde woman from Dartmouth, very successful on Fox, Laura Ingraham, that's her name, Laura Ingraham. So I find her one of the more unpleasant people around. But she has Dr. West on, and she was respectful to him. She treated him well. Maybe I'll play that video tomorrow for you. 2015, Cornel West warns of planetary Selma at Harvard fossil fuel divestment protest. So basically what he's saying is this is another human crisis. It's another crisis of humanity, like segregation, and he uses anti-Jewish behavior. He talks about homophobia. He said this is another evil. And I mean, that's all you can say. I mean, I have likened what we're doing to the planet to the Holocaust. It's a global Holocaust. It's one that we are not able to escape. I just don't see any alternative but Dr. West for president. I hope you'll join me. Support Dr. West, Dr. Cornel West for president of these United States. That'll do it for me today. Hope you have a great Tuesday, rest of your Tuesday. And join me tomorrow. Don't forget, don't ever forget, never forget, like, subscribe.